we want to move on to the next thing, it is incredibly helpful to acknowledge that there was targeting that took place, and the targeting was based on a bad motive, and there was an agenda behind it. And I think that it would just be incredibly helpful for that to be acknowledged.
So Congressman Pete Roskam calling on the IRS commissioner to just admit once and for all that his agency targeted Tea Party groups. This after a new report finds that IRS procedures could still allow bias to play a part in selecting political groups for audit. Congressman Darrell Issa out of California is a Republican on the Judiciary Committee. And how are you, sir? Good morning and welcome back here to America's Newsroom.
Bill, I'm doing fine, and thank you for covering this evolving story by the commissioner and the president.
It appears that it continues to evolve. Let's get to the president in a moment here. John Koskinen says this whole admission is not his call to make. What did you make of that?
Well, you know, he said he was going to get to the bottom and he'd be an honest broker. The fact is he's been a spokesperson for the president. He's been part of the delay and cover-up. And now that this has become an old story, the president, and I am shifting to it, he is actually trying to take back his words from 2013 when he clearly admitted that this was unreasonable targeting. Now he wants to talk about not enough money and blame a law that was passed before he was born and that served us well since the 1950s, and yet now it suddenly is broken. You know, when the president talks about a bad law, he ought to look up his date of birth and 1959 when that law was passed.
Well, that's a heavy charge. One more question and we'll get to the president. Can you say today whether or not the targeting is still happening?
The targeting is still happening. It is clearly still a procedure. And remember one thing, as they talk about tax exempt, remember, Americans pay 100% of their taxes before they can give to these groups. That's one of the little dirty lies that's in here. These are not charities. These are people paying their taxes, then giving to these groups to act on their behalf. And the whole idea that tax exempt is somehow some special deal. These are not tax-free. These are not tax-deductible. And that's an important distinction in the targeting of these groups for their conservative values.
Can you give me a name of someone or some group that's being targeted now?
We still have Tea Party groups that have not been granted. One of the challenges is that that list is of those still pending is not available to anyone except those cleared for 6103. But I suspect as we talk, at least one or more Tea Party groups will come forward and call you and tell you that they are still being delayed in their approvals and they're acting without the kind of legitimacy that they should have.
Jon Stewart asked the president about this just this week on The Daily Show. This is kind of how the back and forth went.
Look, you got this back office, and they're going after the Tea Party. Well, it turned out no. Congress had passed a crummy law that didn't give people guidance in terms of what it was they were trying to do. They did it poorly and stupidly, but that becomes, but
you really do have only a year left. That's unbelievable.
Not enough money, crummy law, blame some folks at the IRS for poor and stupid judgment. Poorly and stupidly is the way he phrased it.
You know, anything he doesn't agree with apparently is stupidly done, including you know, Supreme Court decisions. The fact is that this law served us very well. It was understood, and it wasn't a back room. Lois Lerner was at the seat of government. She was here in Washington. She was high-ranking, and she was a partisan who had been allowed to move from the FEC, where she was a Democratic partisan, to the IRS, where she acted close and in concert with commissioners. So the president liked to rewrite history, but in his own statement, he said it was wrong. He said he'd instructed Secretary Lew, then Secretary Lew, to get to the bottom of it. He now wants to blame it on a law passed before he was born that served us well until it was reinterpreted to serve his political agenda against the Citizens United decision. And the fact is, this is the president with his pen and his phone once again. But look, this is what we've dealt with this administration for a long time. Deny, delay, and then flat ass. I'm sorry for the term, but simply change the story, even if it's not factual. We're dealing with that with the proposed future president, Hillary Clinton. She did the same thing throughout her tenure at the State Department, and it's not acceptable to American people. Obviously, it's important that they understand that facts are a stubborn thing. And when Hillary Clinton got a criminal referral request from 2 inspector generals, this is not something that can be explained away even by getting the New York Times to tone down before they published a report that should cause Americans to realize this is a government that needs more oversight, not less. It needs more IGs. It needs more protection of American people's rights.
The IRS commissioner did say there was no evidence of bias in the selection process, so he is standing by that, and certainly more to come soon. Thank you, sir. Darrell Issa from California on Capitol.